In 1944, the tide of the Pacific War was turning. The Imperial Japanese Army was retreating, leaving behind small, specialized units to harass the advancing Allied forces. On a small, rugged island in the Philippines called Lubang, a young intelligence officer named Hiroo Onoda received his final orders. His commander, Major Taniguchi, looked him in the eye and gave him a command that would define the next 3 decades of his life. He was told to stay behind, to lead a small group in guerrilla warfare, and to never surrender. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, the major said, but whatever happens, we will come back for you. Today, we tell the story of a man for whom the Second World War didn't end in 1945. It didn't end in the 50s or even the 60s. For Hiroo Onoda, the war lasted 29 years beyond the fall of the empire. It is a story of ironclad discipline, the psychological power of duty, and the tragic consequences of a soldier who refused to believe the world had changed. When the war officially ended in August 1945, the news was delivered to the jungles of Lubang via leaflets dropped from American planes. The war ended on August 15th. "Come down from the mountains," the papers proclaimed. Onoda, along with his 3 subordinates, Corporal Shimada and Privates Akatsu and Kozuka, gathered around the paper in the dim light of the jungle canopy. But Onoda was no ordinary soldier. He was a graduate of the Nakano School, an elite institution for intelligence and unconventional warfare. He had been trained to spot enemy deception. To Onoda's trained mind, the leaflets were too perfect. The grammar was slightly off, the printing too clean. He convinced his men that this was a clever Allied ruse designed to lure them into the open so they could be captured or killed. He believed the Japanese Navy was still out there, regrouping for a massive counteroffensive. Every time a ship appeared on the horizon or a plane flew overhead, he didn't see a world at peace. He saw an enemy patrol. Life in the jungle was a masterpiece of survival and paranoia. The 4 men lived like shadows. They built hidden shelters that they moved frequently to avoid detection. They raided local villages for rice and salt, and they killed farm cattle for meat, drying the beef in the sun to keep it from rotting in the humid air. They lived by a strict military routine, polishing their Arisaka rifles every day and keeping their limited supply of ammunition bone dry. But isolation takes a toll. In 1949, Private Akatsu decided he could no longer endure the life of a ghost. He slipped away from the group and, after 6 months alone in the bush, surrendered to the Philippine authorities. Onoda and the remaining 2 men viewed Akatsu's disappearance not as a sign that the war was over, but as a security breach. They retreated deeper into the mountains, certain that Akatsu would be tortured into giving away their position. Years bled into decades. In 1954, the group was involved in a shootout with a local search party on the beach. Corporal Shimada was hit and died from his wounds. Now, only Onoda and Kozuka remained. For the next 18 years, these 2 men were the only inhabitants of a private world of combat. They grew older together, their uniforms rotting off their backs, replaced by clothes patched with bark and scavenged scraps. They watched the world from the ridges of Lubang, seeing the island modernize, seeing lights flicker on in villages that once were dark, yet they interpreted every change through the lens of military strategy. Then came 1972. While burning a pile of rice they believed belonged to the enemy, they were engaged by local police. In a chaotic exchange of fire, Kozuka was killed. Onoda was now truly alone. Back in Japan, the discovery of Kozuka's body sent shockwaves through the nation. They had thought all the holdouts were dead. The Japanese government sent search parties, family members, and loudspeakers into the jungle, begging Onoda to come home. Onoda heard the voices of his own siblings calling out to him through the trees. But even then, his training held him captive. He believed the enemy had captured his family and was forcing them to record messages at gunpoint. The breakthrough didn't come from a government official or a general. It came from a young, eccentric college dropout named Norio Suzuki. Suzuki had a list of 3 things he wanted to find in his life: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. In 1974, he traveled to Lubang and did what thousands of soldiers had failed to do. He found Onoda's tracks, set up a tent, and waited. When they finally met, Suzuki was wearing a t-shirt and flip-flops. He told Onoda that the war had been over for nearly 30 years, that Japan was now an economic powerhouse, and that the emperor was still alive. Onoda listened, his rifle still aimed at the young man, but he remained stubborn. He told Suzuki, "I cannot surrender. I am a soldier. I must wait for orders from my superior." Suzuki returned to Japan and did the impossible. He found Onoda's former commander, Major Taniguchi, who was now an old man working in a bookstore. On March 9th, 1974, the two men flew back to the Philippines. Onoda emerged from the jungle to find his commander standing at a prearranged spot. Taniguchi, dressed in a formal suit, read the official order. All combat operations were to cease immediately. Onoda stood at rigid attention. He saluted. He then drew his samurai sword and handed it to the major. In that moment, the weight of 29 years of wasted war came crashing down. At the age of 52, Hiroo Onoda stepped into a future he didn't recognize. He returned to a Japan that hailed him as a hero of the old spirit, but he was a man out of time. He struggled with the consumerism of the 1970s and eventually moved to Brazil to start a new life as a rancher, finally finding the peace that the jungle had denied him. Hiroo Onoda's story is more than a curiosity of history. It is a profound meditation on the nature of reality. It shows us that we do not live in the world as it is, but in the world as we believe it to be. For nearly 30 years, his belief was his reality, and his rifle was his truth. He remains the ultimate symbol of the soldier who gave everything for a war that had already forgotten him.